This morning's topic is going to be one of those controversial topics, and that's all I need is controversy on this channel, right? Recent events considered. But I also want to do a shout out. I want to do a shout out to Old Man White Cotton. Old Man White Cotton was one of my first mentors. And in light of certain emails I've received about some of you taking medication, some of you taking antidepressants, and otherwise supporting Big Pharma, I thought this was a good topic to do. So in the very early 1990s, I had a friend named Travis, and Travis got into some trouble. Travis was just plain crazy. He would mess around with gangs and do really bad stuff, and my parents would say, stay away, this guy's crazy. Of course, being 19, or not even 19, I was like 17, 16. I didn't listen. So we went out and got in fights and did all kinds of crazy things. But this was one of my first lessons in wisdom from my very young years. And what I ended up doing was I went over to this kid's house and I met his dad. His dad's name was White Cotton. Old Man White Cotton, we called him, because he had a big old Santa beard. And he was one of the most wise and reflective people that I ever knew. He taught me to play chess. And of course, he whipped me, and I realized this guy could play a very mean game of chess. And it wasn't until 176 games later of starting to play him that I was actually able to tie him on one game. And then it was a whole bunch more until I was ever able to beat him. And I think I was only ever able to beat him one time. But I would go after school over to this kid's house, and after we were done making trouble, I would get to talk to his dad. And in all of the horrible things that this family did, and Old Man White Cotton was no father of the year. He had his own demons to battle, because this was a very troubled family. And of course, I didn't have the wisdom at the time to see my way through any of this. We ended up parting ways, but not before I learned a very valuable lesson. I learned one of the first lessons in self-confidence, in that the way I learned was valuable and unique. So I was a gifted student in school. I had a high A average in biology and in English. By the time I was in second grade, I had a 12th grade reading level at second grade, and I was gifted, but I was also disabled. I couldn't learn mathematics very well, and I used to carry that around with me. And one day I happened to say to Old Man White Cotton, I'm really terrible at math. I'm just learning disabled, because that's what one of the counselors at school had told me. Joe, you are learning disabled. We need to put you on a program. And Old Man White Cotton, with a bottle of hooch in his hand, took a swig and said, Joe, don't ever say that again. That is absolute bullshit. And he used these words. He said, it's just how you learn. That's what you need to remember. It is how you learn. And it's unique to every person. You can try to quantify it. You can try to typify it. But ultimately, it's just how you learn. You're not disabled. And it was as if angels were singing. I always remembered that conversation. Even after all of these years when we haven't talked, and he's, in a different place in life, and so am I never forgot that conversation. He gave me, this old crazy man, my confidence in my very early years when I was running around and setting mailboxes on fire and doing things that misguided kids do. And I've taken that with me, and as I found myself over the years with the OMAD journey here and everything, I have found that all the things against Big Pharma and medications and so-called theories of learning are absolutely true. And so fast forwarding ahead to now, I get a lot of questions on medication. I get a lot of questions on what if I take Prozac or Ritalin? And I know so many people who have been taught to take medications. And as much as I hate to do it, I hate to come out on my channel and say that that's not a good idea. But it's not a good idea. If you can help it, it's not a good idea. And here's where you find the difference in myself and someone else. I've never been a type to take medication for long. I took blood pressure medication as a big guy because the blood pressure kept going up and I got scared. But then I stopped because of the cost and because I was just stubborn. But it was that stubbornness that gave me sort of an insight inside of myself. Most people are victims. And I realized that's the difference between myself and others. Most people are victims. They love to trust others, and they do so very eagerly, very sheepishly, to assume that others know what they're talking about. And you see this on the internet. You see a lot of people who are advocating for various drugs for various conditions, and they jump on the internet, and then of course they have their followers. They have these people that come in behind them and take the drugs and experience the side effects, but they still believe it's the best move for them. I had a couple women come into my hotel a few weeks ago, and this one woman was a true believer in every medication for perceived medical conditions that you could imagine. Borderline personality and all of these things. We've become experts at typifying and dissecting personality traits and learning traits and all of these sorts of things. And we put labels on them. This person is mood disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and we start to give names to all of this sort of stuff. And lo and behold, we feel very smart. But what we don't consider is the fact that we're not saying anything. Back in the 1800s, if a kid was retarded, if a kid was autistic, there were just certain understandings that that kid couldn't do certain things. I'm not saying everything that happened in the 1800s was good for learning and progress. I'm not saying that. But I am saying, unlike now, then we just accepted that the kid who was not very smart was going to pump gas the rest of his or her life. They were going to sit there and sew if they could. They were going to, maybe move boxes because they couldn't do more than that. On the other hand, those who were gifted, who could do just one thing well, stumbled their way into being a shade tree philosopher or doing something that otherwise they could do. Today, we break those down into little categories. Autism is caused by fish. Autism is caused by vaccines. Autism is caused by being next to power plants or being next to mercury processing plants or something like that. And I'm not trying to start today a crazy expose on why this stuff happens. What I am pointing you toward and away from, toward is the truth of self-control, and away from is the idea that medicines are some sort of panacea of help. They're not. Here are the facts, and I have done my best to verify these. There is no evidence of chemical imbalances. I used to believe, well, depression is caused by a chemical imbalance. That's what people would say. But the fact is, there are no studies done on this. There are no studies done that say that someone who takes medicine for depression has a chemical imbalance. How would you verify a thing like that in an individual? You can create a theory on why that happens, but ultimately, it's just a theory. It's like guessing what your pancreas is doing to cause diabetes. You can do some tests, and if you don't have certain markers that show up, you're in the dark again. All you can do is accept that a condition is a condition. It's hard science, in other words, and it goes into pseudoscience. It goes into nonsense. Number two, when medications for mental disorders do seem to work, they are barely better than placebo. And there are a number of medical experts coming out now, and I will link to one of the leading guides on this, one of the leading books on this, that is doing its best to out this sort of idea of dependence on medication for all sorts of stuff. Number three, the rabbit hole is truly one of hell. Side effects and swapping new drugs, it's a hell cycle. That's the first thing, is what you find a medication, and what do these people do who depend on medication? They have to eventually swap that out for a better medication because this one doesn't work anymore. Well, it never worked. It never worked. It just seemed to work. In the same way that taking a sugar pill seems to help a sore throat or a headache or a cold. And if you're familiar with placebo-controlled trials, there's always an effect. with a placebo on any condition. And that's why they say in studies this medicine was better or worse or equal to a placebo, which means just something you take that is not very effective. Well, that's the first leg of the hell of the rabbit hole and how deep it runs about swapping drugs. But the next is the permanent disability. That's the second leg, because once you start taking medication, you're faced with the fact that you have to keep taking it forever. If you believe you have mood disorders and you start taking medicines to correct them, then you're saying for life that that's what you have to do. You're signing away your freedom, in other words. Let me pause right here and make an exception. Since we have medicines do make possible a life that allows you to live longer. The question is, should you, or happier? Most of us would say that it's a very good thing to be able to allow a diabetic to live longer, whereas if they didn't have insulin, like in 1910, 1912, before insulin was discovered, you were dead. That was it. They called it in Egypt the sleeping sickness, where you started urinating a lot, you got thirsty, you kept peeing, and that was diabetes and you died. But it was rare. They just called it a sleeping sickness. Is it wise to allow someone to have the means to continue to live? I have a friend, Paul. He's a part of the Skeptic Society of the UK. He's got a very good, strong, rational mind. He's a smart guy. He's in his late 60s now. And he's just a great guy, but he has schizophrenia, and he does take a pill to keep from hearing voices. So would I tell him to not take his medicine? Certainly not. If we can find a result to make someone who would otherwise be useless to society or dead, to allow them to be productive, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I'm saying, is it a good thing overall? And does it really help? Despite several commitments to psych wards, he still had to check himself in on several occasions. So it makes you ask the question, what is it about the brain that is being so difficult so as to make all of these medications no longer work? Why is it the case that if a person abuses drugs and they keep abusing drugs, they have to keep taking higher levels of the same thing? Doesn't this tell us something? Doesn't this tell us that in the vast majority of cases, it's not an actual problem that we're facing, but us? And I have said over in this journey, over and over again, that if you fail, it's because you're at war with yourself. In my counseling this week, I've talked to 2 ladies. It has been the same struggle. It's these individuals who happen to be ladies who are at war with their own mind. And therefore they can't quiet their mind. They can't keep calm. They can't control the voices in there that say, I want to eat, I deserve to eat, I am hungry, why should I have to control myself and someone else not? If the scale's not moving downward, why am I doing this? I want a return on my fasting investment. It's the same inability to quiet the mind. And as other topics come up, I find that they're the same people who go on Prozac. They're the same people who've been taught that Ritalin is a good thing, that you should put your hyperactive kids on drugs rather than make them sit down. Rather than tell them, hey, we got this, we can do this, here's what we're going to do right now, we're going to do this later. Rather than doing the hard thing, they take the easy way. They do that because it's who they are as their own victims. That's why anyone ultimately fails in their efforts. It's the inability to quiet their mind. My friends, what is the hardest thing for you to do? The hardest thing of all. No, it's not to climb Mount Everest. It's not to get a degree in culinary science. It's not to do really anything except sit still. That's what the OMAD revolution teaches you. That's what this channel really teaches you. Just to sit still and control your appetites is ultimately the best medicine you will ever take. Because fasting, meditating, exercising, concentrating, being able to remove yourself from the stimulus of everyone else, Being able to be in isolation and control your mind is the greatest drug there has ever been, because it doesn't have any side effects except your self-betterment in every area of your life. And I've never forgotten, when I reflect back, even to this day, and I think about it almost every day, I think back on Old Man White Cotton's words. And of course, Old Man White Cotton, as flawed as he was, as a parent and as a man, as an individual, he drank heavily, he smoked heavily, he did all these things. That's how life works. The divine speaks through the chaos. The divine speaks through the extremes. And sometimes you learn something from a guy who sits on his porch with a 40-ouncer and has nothing else to tell you except one truth. Joe, that's how you learn. Apply that to yourself. What is it? How is it that you learn? The struggles that you face, the emotions that you quarrel with, when the demons dance on your bed at night and you say, I could have done this, I could have done that, I should have done this. Do you have the ability to just sit still? It's the hardest thing to do. So what I'm telling you here today is we learn a lot just by watching others. You can look at all of the things in your life. I look at myself now and I don't struggle with the self-esteem that I used to struggle with. I used to think I wasn't meant to count. I used to think that I just wasn't meant to matter because I was an eccentric kid who had high strengths and low weaknesses. And I used to think that I was somehow a victim. I learned, thankfully, many years ago that I'm not, because I am my own unique expression of the divine, as are you. When you realize that, you accept all of the faults, the so-called faults that you have, and the real faults that you have. And you realize that were it not for them, you would have no identity. So it's not that you struggle with something or don't struggle with something. It's how you are. And it couldn't have been any other way. So in the quest for mental health and self-esteem and a better life, and you don't need anything except the ability to look inward. And that's why if you go to, and we just got done talking the last video about Buddhism and about being a monk, the real lesson there is that they won't accept you if you take any of those sorts of medications, because having a completely present mind is the ultimate gift. It's the gift of fasting and self-control and the ability to unlock the higher functions of your brain. They won't accept you if you can't do that. But you shouldn't accept yourself in most all instances if you cannot be fully present in this moment, fully present in your life, fully present with your wife and kids or husband. That's what you owe to yourself, and it's what you owe to them. Because your mind and the freedom that you can possibly know and experience, it's all you've got. Inside, that's all you've got. Anything that threatens to take that away, it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal, and you're the loser on that exchange. So I hope this has in some way motivated your own fasting journey, your own ability to look inward. Have a good day.